My name's Tom Place, this is Chasing Cars, and today we are coming to you from Germany where we're having a look at a few products from Ford. One of them is the Tourneo next to me, and it's best thought of as a people mover variant of the Transit Custom, which we've covered off in a separate video. Now, it's been quite some time since Ford has offered a people mover variant in Australia, decades even. However, with their passenger lineup starting to look a little bit thin on Australian soil, this is seen as a real opportunity. Back home in Australia, the Kia Carnival is absolutely cleaning up that segment. It's just had a facelift and it seems to be better than ever before. Plus, there is a new hybrid option on the way, which is going to be very popular with Australian buyers, I'm sure. However, the Tourneo has a bit of a trick up its sleeve that the Kia Carnival doesn't yet have access to. This is the fully electric variant. Now, the diesel variant has already been confirmed for our market and it's going to be priced for a bit under $66,000. This electric version is doubtless going to cost a little bit more. However, I do think it could be a real strength for this vehicle to show something different because at the moment there really isn't much on offer in that segment, which is fully electric. Now, in today's video, we're going to be talking about both the electric and the diesel variant already booked in for our market, but I will be covering off a little bit about this electric variant. This one here, it goes up to 325 kilometers of range, which isn't heaps, but it might be just enough to get your daily duties out of the way. Before we get started in today's video, please don't forget to like and subscribe and comment down below if you want to see more content like this. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. Now, if you've ever had a look at Ford's global van lineup, you'll know that it's absolutely dizzying in the amount of engines and body styles and different variants they offer in different parts of the world. This is officially known as the Tourneo Custom in different parts of the world, but we're just going to know it as the Tourneo. So we're going to have two grades in Australia, an entry grade, and we're also going to have this, which is the Titanium X. Now, it is the European specification, so there's going to be a few things that have changed here or there, but for the most part, what you see here is what we're going to get in Australia. Of the two body styles, the short and the long wheelbase variant, we are getting the short, but I'm going to tell you that's absolutely no loss because inside this thing is absolutely huge, as well as the boot. So that's going to be exciting. We're going to check that out in just a moment. But having a look at it now, it's kind of an interesting vehicle. It's just under 2 meters tall, which was a measure they made so you can get into more car parks and things like that. We've got some nice LED lights at the front and these 19-inch alloy wheels, which I think look really striking. I'm not sure I would go for this black color in the hot Australian sun though. No, thank you. But anyway, that's enough for the outside. Let's jump on the inside. Now, jumping into the interior now, this is the very top model, so it's going to have a lot of features, but a lot of this does come standard on the entry-level grade in Australia. You can see its van DNA in some places, you know, some hard scratchy plastics, but I would argue when it comes to people movers, it's kind of similar to a work van. You want to have surfaces that aren't going to be marked easy and you want to have a bit more durability to them. There are some nice soft surfaces in certain places. Let's start with the steering wheel, for example. Nice square design. I really quite like this actually, though unfortunately you don't get the very clever folding technique that you do get in the commercial grade, which I personally really like to chuck your laptop on there or have some lunch when you're out on the go. Also, with this chair, as we often see in people movers, we've got some separate arms that come down like here, so you can space out like so. Now, you will notice that between the seats here, I do have a bit of a space, and that's because in some markets, they do offer this as a 9-seat option. Ours is an 8-seat option, and there's still plenty of room. And I will also say that as much as it would be nice to have the option to step up to a 9-seat option in Australia, having the ability to walk through the seats certainly is very handy. One other difference between the 8 and the 9-seat option is we do have this pop-out section here, and the phone charger, which is all the way down here. It's almost on the floor. Very interesting indeed. Now, for the most part, I think they've done a good job at making this more of a passenger vehicle, but there are a few other signs, I think, where it shows its commercial credentials where it probably shouldn't. And one that I particularly don't like is the fact that we do see the steering mechanism down by your feet, even just now looking at it. And I do think they should have gone to the extra effort of covering that up, and also perhaps added some sound deadening while they're at it, as I'll talk a bit more about later on. But in terms of other positives about this cabin, I will say I quite like this 13-inch touchscreen that we've got here. It's really bright, really crisp, and it's running the latest version of Ford's Sync 4 software. It's a much bigger step up from Sync 3, I gotta say. Wireless Apple CarPlay, wireless Android Auto, and that wireless phone charger, as I said before. So all very nice indeed. They're ticking those fundamentals. In front of me is an additional 8-inch digital driver's display. Some of you might be familiar with this one. It's also in the entry-level versions of the Ranger. It's pretty nice for the most part, though I do think it perhaps be a little bit brighter. It's a little bit dim in some of the sunlight that I've been driving through. In terms of other parts of this cabin, one thing I do like is we actually have a sun visor which covers the whole thing. You know, small things like that really do make a difference when you're doing lots of driving. And I've also got a good amount of storage in this cabin, which does speak for a positive side of its commercial underpinnings. In here, for example, we do have a good amount of space in there. And the reason they're able to do that is actually because they've integrated the passenger airbag up into the roof, so that deploys down instead of just directly in front, so they can have a little bit more storage. So well done, Ford, there. Now, jumping into the back seat now, you notice the first thing is the fact that we have 3 individual seats here, and it really is quite a fantastic maneuver. They use a multi-track system, which means that you can take all of the seats out of the back of here if you so choose, and use this as a genuine van, but also you have a bit of flexibility in the way these seats can be arranged. So for example, all these 3 seats can go in individually, backwards or forwards. You can have this one backwards or whatever you so wish. So it's great that you have that everyday flexibility where the car is able to work around you instead of you trying to work around it. Now, it's interesting to note that as standard, we actually get 3-zone climate control in the Tourneo, and that's really good. You have your own separate control up here so kids can play around, you know, less arguments and things like that. And the placing of the air vents up here in the ceiling, I think, is really quite good, because it means that when you're moving these seats around, you're not going to get blocked out and things like that. And also, if you have a rearwards facing baby seat, you can get the air actually onto the kid's face instead of just blowing on their knees like so many models do. Now, this being the top grade, we do get these nice leather seats, but we also get this panoramic sunroof up here, and I really do have some mixed opinions on this. It's been beautiful to see out of on a nice summer's day, for example, but to the touch, it's really hot. You know, it almost hurts to the touch because of the amount of radiation that it's stopping coming through due to the special coating on it. But I don't particularly like the fact that you can't close it when you don't want to see out of it. You know, there is a degree of sunlight that's going to come through, and if you're trying to get your kids to go asleep or stop being distracted, and that's going to be a bit of a pain. And I do hope that Ford launches this with some sort of accessory to block that when you don't want to have it open. Now, as you can see, I've got absolutely stacks of room back here, and you could comfortably seat 3 adults back here, not just because of the amount of room I've got, but also because they've got individual bolstering on these seats. And once again, it's really great that we have those 3 individual seats. But how much have we got left over in the 3rd row? Let's go check it out. Now, before I start the undignified process of getting into the 3rd row of this vehicle, let's first of all just take a look at how much room we've got here initially. As I said, this is a multi-track system, and it means you really can have about as much room in whatever row that you so wish, which is also very nice. Now, we don't have a one-touch roll system here. To get it down, I just pull this lever here and I move the seat physically like so, but that really does open quite a lot of room. So I get in like so. There we go. And I'm in the center row here now. So overall, I do have a good amount of room even back here. I can also put this down like so, and I've got a separate table, which is really quite lovely indeed. Now, this seat 1 and 2 I'm on now is actually part of the same bench, but this one right next to me on my right-hand side is a singular seat. So you do have quite a bit of flexibility. Back here now, it's a similar sort of situation. I've got a good amount of room, and I've also got a good amount of visibility, not just because of this huge big roof overhead. You also got a few things like USB-C points just dotted around the cabin, and there's even a place to put your phone and cup holders. I will say that one thing I do think is lacking is because these windows here are absolutely huge. Look, they are tinted, but I do think they could use some pull-up sunshades in both the 2nd and 3rd row. Now, one thing I do think families should really closely consider when they're looking at a people mover is the amount of ISOFIX points they need and the amount that the cars are able to actually provide. So this has a decent amount. We've got 4 in total, so there's 2 in the 2nd row and there is 2 in the 3rd row. So it's great to have that flexibility, and combined with that multi-track system, you can actually really shuffle this car around as you need. Coming around to the back now, and the first thing that you notice, apart from this being, well, absolutely huge, I reckon you could land a helicopter on that thing, is the fact that it's not actually a power tailgate. It is heavily assisted, and it's not too hard for me to do, but I think when it comes time to the actual closing action, that's when it's become a little bit more challenging for some people. You know, this is pretty high up in the air. So I would like to see some power action added there, especially considering that we have 2 power doors on this car. It's a little bit confusing. Anyway, now as far as the actual space on board, obviously this does vary a lot by where you have your seats positioned. But Ford says in its rearmost position with the 3 seats up, it's about 1,000 litres. Get rid of the 3rd row here, it's about 2,500 litres. And if you get rid of the 2nd row as well, it goes up to a mammoth 4,700 litres. This thing truly is a van. Now, we've got a few things back here, like a tie-down point on each side. That's very nice. We've also got a 12-volt, and we've also got a little bit of extra lighting here. But in general, it's pretty basic stuff. All right, but that's enough for the boot. So I'm going to try and close it. As I said, as you can see, I'm 6 foot tall, and that's a bit of a reach for me. So Little bit of an interesting decision there. But while we're at the rear of the vehicle, let's talk about towing, because this is another trick that it has up its sleeve. The diesel version can have about 2,500 kilos behind it, brake towing capacity that is. But the EV version is where it's a bit of a surprise. You can still pull 2 tons even when you go for the fully electric option, which I do think is a bit of a rarity in this segment. So what's it like to drive the Ford Tourneo? Overall, I think this is actually a really nice experience. And I think it speaks to the merits of how good people movers really are. They're just good at so many things, and they're not actually that bad to drive anymore. A lot of the ones of old were a little bit sloppy and not all that much fun to engage with, but I definitely think they've made some progress in recent years. With Ford putting in a lot of effort into the suspension redesign of the Tourneo for this generation, I do think overall it's been a pretty good product. It's fairly dynamically competent. You don't feel like you're working this car too hard, and I think overall that is a good thing. You know, this isn't a race car, but this is a car that we want to drive along and it be fairly competent, so certainly no worries there. I will say that there are times where I do think this is a little bit too firm. It seems to be a little bit too reactive and not quite absorbent enough of some of the corrugations on the road. Much to my surprise when I've been over here, it turns out Germany has some pretty awful roads just like us. Most of them are pretty nice, but they also have a fair share of dodgy roads. And so I think to a certain degree my experience here has been relevant back home to Australian roads. Now, I've been driving the diesel variants of the Tourneo as well as the electric variants, and I do think the diesel is actually a pretty good unit. You know, it's a 2-litre turbo diesel 4-cylinder. It's a pretty classic sort of engine we see in a lot of the more commercial products. And look, it doesn't set the world on fire with its power outputs, but it is fairly smooth and it works well with the 8-speed transmission. You don't really have to think about. The one that's being sold in Australia will be the front-wheel drive option only. There is an all-wheel drive option out there, but I'm not entirely sure it's absolutely necessary. You know, the Kia Carnival gets away with a front-wheel drive setup, and so do many others out there. It is nice to have all-wheel drive, but fundamentally, I do think that they only really come into their own in super slippery and rainy conditions, because you don't really have the ground clearance like you do on, say, a Toyota Kluger or a Ford Everest that actually allow you to make use of that all-wheel drive. This is really just for slippery conditions, so I don't think it's a huge loss that we don't get that locally. But of course, it's always nice to have the option, and it seems this time Ford has chosen to go with a slimmer lineup. Now, I am actually driving the fully electric version of the Tourneo, the e-Tourneo at the moment. I got to say, it certainly is my favorite. Interestingly, by switching from the diesel to the electric version, you actually switch from a front-wheel drive to a rear-wheel drive. And so right off the bat, you certainly do have better dynamics just inherently from the balance of the car and the way it drives. And all that's certainly not a big deal for a lot of people mover buyers out there. It's certainly something that I've come to appreciate. And it just adds a little bit of specialness to this car that isn't necessarily offered by others in this segment. The power outputs are also up. It's 160 kilowatts of power in this configuration and 415 newton meters of torque. Certainly not kidding around with those numbers. And because that 415 newton meters of torque is available from, you know, a complete standing start, it is got some serious punch off the line. Although I do think there has been some calibration to take the edge out of that torque shove right at the beginning, so you're not spinning wheels at every single traffic light. Now, the electric version is armed with a 64 kilowatt hour usable battery size. It's making it certainly not a massive battery, but I do think by having less weight on board, they're going to help themselves achieve a little bit more efficiency. The official claim is about up to 325 kilometers on the WLTP scale. The one I'm in at the moment is more closer to about 300. I've been doing a bit of urban driving while I'm around here, and I've seen about 16 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers driven, and that suggests a total driving range of around about 400 Ks. In more mixed conditions, I've seen closer to about 20 kilowatt hours, but I do think in general, 16 kilowatt hours for something that can carry 8 people certainly isn't too bad. So what about when that battery goes flat? Well, in terms of charging, we do have pretty good AC charging. It's 3-phase, 11 kilowatts max speed, which will see the battery go from flat to full in about 6.7 hours, so says Ford. As far as DC charging, look, it's okay. 125 kilowatts is the peak speed, and that's going to top up the battery from about 10 to 80% in around 40 minutes. So you can get a quick charge when you're out on the road. Though personally, I don't really think the merits of this vehicle stand in its grand touring ability, simply because that range is a little bit more restrictive. If I was going to have this one in my life, I think it would be the errand running vehicle. It does seem to be where it excels the most. I think there's also something to be said for just the added serenity that comes with going for the electric option. you know, if you're a mum or a dad or whatever, and you've got lots of kids that are carrying on in the back seat, what you don't need is more noise in your life. You don't need more people making, or more things rather, making racket, and having that added quietness in the cabin or a few moments to yourself every day. You know, I'm driving along at 70 kilometers an hour and it's absolutely whisper quiet. You know, yes, there's a bit of wind noise, as I said before. It probably needs a little bit more sound insulation. But for the most part, by just completely muting the drivetrain up front, this is a really nice driving experience, I've got to say. Now finally, let's talk about safety. It is a family car, so it's important they do get this right. Now there is no ANCAP rating as of yet. However, some initial testing in Europe of this vehicle and its siblings has suggested that it performs pretty well in a crash overall. So that's certainly very encouraging to see. Safety features, well, we do have forwards AEB with junction detection. We've got front and rear parking sensors, a really decent 360-degree camera actually, and also some other things like rear cross traffic alert. And look, they're certainly very handy to have because vans, well, you know, the visibility on this one is pretty good, but for the most part, they're not the easiest vehicles to drive and certainly not the easiest vehicles to park and see everything that's going on all at the same time. So it's great that we do have those safety aids. With the Fiesta, Focus and Escape all gone from the Australian market in the last few years, Ford's passenger lineup is starting to look a little bit thin. And unfortunately, there's a few other products available from Ford globally, like for example, the Bronco Sport in the States, which simply aren't available for Ford Australia to bring into the country. It's why this is seen as such a real opportunity. And I do think it's a bit of a shame that we don't see more passenger vehicles from Ford in Australia, because they have shown in the past that they're really capable of making some fantastic vehicles. Unfortunately, Aussies aren't really all that interested in buying them because obviously they just simply don't suit their needs. However, I do think there is room for growth in the people mover segment. It does seem to be the thing that's on the up and up, and the fact that only the Carnival was really successful there says to me that there's some room for extra competition. However, after spending a few days with this vehicle, I really do think there is some room for improvement. Mainly, it's just a little bit too agricultural. I think Ford should put in a little bit more effort into separating the way the Transit Custom drives and also the way this drives. It's just a little bit too choppy, a little bit unrefined, especially in that diesel grade. However, I do think it's priced fairly well considering the value it packs inside, and if they do indeed bring the electric version to Australia, I do think that could be something very special and very unique indeed. Currently on the market, all we've really got is the LDV MIFA. That's about $100,000. We are expecting the Volkswagen ID Buzz to come to Australia as well. However, I don't really think that's going to be a very cheap vehicle either. And if this launched for about 70 to 80 grand, it could be a really good thing. But it remains to be seen if that is indeed the case. In terms of the fundamentals across both models though, I will say that I have been pretty impressed with the way this vehicle drives, and the safety package is also pretty good as well. But look, that's just been our first look at this model today. I'm keen to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Would you go for one of these? And if you would you go for the fully electric or would you go for the diesel? Let me know in those comments down below. Don't forget to like this video and also subscribe if you want more. But for now, that's all. Thank you for watching Chasing Cars.